Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Apologies in advance for at the beginning of the once again failed focus getting all spastic. It only happens here, and for the first couple of seconds I actually cut out quite a bit of footage just so nobody would have to endure it. So, Inktober. This was maybe day 2? Yeah, day 2. So this year I was not really seeing a whole lot of different prompt lists since Instagram's algorithm is a hot dumpster fire. Of course it is. I decided to just Google witch and Inktober and see what it gave me. This one in particular is from Tumblr. I didn't click into the actual Tumblr page though, so I have no idea what year it's from. It's called Woodland Magic by Small Town Spells. Thank you to Small Town Spells for the fun list. I've been making a whole video showing off all my Inktober paintings. This is future me way past day 2, as you may have guessed since the video is up near at the end of October. Yeah, you shall see, and I'll go over in detail what my thoughts and goals were. So day 2 prompt is moon, and I am gonna just talk about actually what I've been using now that the footage is very calm. I used an actually mixed media Canson gray paper. So if you're wondering if I just had really bad lighting, no, the paper is actually gray, so that's why it does seem like it's gray. It is. I'm also using Liquitex acrylic inks, black and a muted gray, which in my eyes it kind of looks like a very muted purple, which is kind of cool. Overall, this is a mixed media piece, as I do end up using some gouache. I use that pencil crayon just to outline the silhouette of the witch. So this first layer was a little bit stressful because when you're using acrylic inks, you kind of have to work faster than when you're doing watercolors, even when it is kind of wet on wet. I mean, it's still a little bit mobile and you can move it around, but if you screwed up a little bit, like there in the corner I did, and in another part on the bottom right kind of thing, it's you can't really blend it after the fact. But with some practice, you kind of get it done. So I come back after the first layer is dry, and it dries a lot lighter just because I guess there's like water added, and it's like acrylic ink is not the most opaque black in my opinion anyway, but it's nice to work with for mixed media, especially because it 100% won't like lift, and so you can work with very light colors and stuff, and you won't have to worry about it like muddying up. That's why it's my go-to ink. Honestly, even when I'm using a dipping pen, I often prefer it, even though it clogs the dipping pen a lot faster just because it is acrylic ink. So I'm going into the moon with the white gouache. I recommend, if you are a beginner with gouache and you're buying like tube paints, just get a really big white tube. Like that Winsor Newton white tube sitting on the left hand side is actually much bigger than all the rest of my colors. I had already gone through a small Holbein tube, so yeah, yeah, that was the quickest replacement in terms of my gouache, even though I haven't even been using gouache that much. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been mixing in a little bit of subtle colors just to add that extra thing, just because I didn't want it to be a completely monochromatic, just black and white kind of piece. Another thing with white gouache, and I'm also not like the most familiar with it, is every time you add water, it does seem to want to dry almost transparent, and to the point where half the time it felt like I didn't even do anything when I come back after it dries. So I do go over it about several times, but I kind of do the lean over fat technique where I keep just building it up until the point where I'm barely adding any water. But the initial layers, I did want it to be kind of lighter anyway, and not have the moon completely just like a solid white. I unfortunately have zero tips when it comes to painting planets or the moon. This is actually one of my first times where I've painted the moon, and I actually really liked the way it turned out. Normally, for me, when I paint it, it kind of just feels like this sphere with a bunch of like streaks or something that just don't feel like they ended up looking proper. Like they're supposed to be craters, right? And divots or whatever the proper terms are. And a lot of times, anytime I painted it before, I felt like I messed that up. In this case, all the references I was looking at, it was kind of different lighting, but I kind of went with instinct and combining which parts I liked. I didn't want it to be like, oh, shadow of the moon. I did want it to be a completely full, more or less illuminated one, except for like, you know, the sort of crater-like parts or something. Aside from technique, I kind of wanted this entire Inktober to be more of a witchy and more Halloween themed kind of thing. If you didn't notice from me saying that I was Googling witch and Inktober together. Also, I really wanted to push myself to use different papers and try out different techniques. Like I hadn't really touched this gray paper much since I bought it. I only did one gouache painting on it. And then that was about it. So I decided Inktober was like the perfect time to start like using a lot of my papers that I hadn't touched in a while. I think I'd been working on my sketchbook and not really doing any finished works for maybe almost 2 months now. I know I had my vacation and pre-prepping for vacation and work and everything, so that might have been why I just hadn't really gotten around to it. And I figured, why not? Especially since sizing can go in papers, so yeah, if you're feeling too precious about your papers, just go for it. You might as well practice on it because it does feel drastically different than working just in a basic sketchbook. So here I am going in and adding the foreground trees. I'm just doing the very classic pine tree because it's just very satisfying. Doing silhouettes of pine trees to me, I enjoy it so much. I know so many people have done it and stuff like that, so it's nothing special or anything, but it's just so fun to do and just so satisfying of almost how easy it is. I am going with straight up ink. I haven't added any water to dilute it, and I am using the black ink in particular, if anybody's wondering. I also do just usually draw a line first just so I get my bearings of how to of drawing the pine tree, because I can't imagine a straight line. My usually often things will end up pretty wonky if I didn't do it. I don't know, is there anything you also enjoy painting that's not super unique but super relaxing and just so much fun to do regardless of whether or not somebody would look at it as something super amazing, even if it's, you know, something everybody else might have done 1,000 times? So at this point I'm realizing that the trees don't look dense enough at the bottom, and instead of just adding random streaks of lines, I'm just thinking of like the tree placement of overlapping trees. I figured that would just be the easiest way to make it not too random, even though you wouldn't be able to tell. I don't know, it's just one of those things. My brain felt like the lines make more sense even though there's a lot happening. I probably could have made it even thicker and the other trees just a little bit fuller, but I still like the way it kind of turned out. So now I'm adding a layer I probably should have done before I added the tree. It is a watercolor layer, but at the same time watercolors can get a little bit opaque and less translucent. And if you have a foreground layer, you probably want it to be the most distinct and covered, especially like a silhouette that's black. I also happen to be using watercolor with glitter in it. So overlapping on top of the trees at certain angles, it would definitely be more obvious to see that. It makes total sense to do the foreground last, but I guess maybe I just got too excited with the trees and I had done it. Even though I knew for sure I was going to have an in-between layer, just like one more with the sky. Right now where my paintbrush is painting, that particular bloom I was a little bit dissatisfied with. I thought maybe it was a little bit too intense. I'm not sure if it was the paper or because of the medium, and I added just way too much water trying to make sure it spread out. So I did go in next with some gouache just to also soften up any of the more harsher kind of bloomy stuff, and also add a bit more color, considering watercolor is still a bit more translucent, like a little too translucent on this kind of blackish grayish ink, but I think overall it all blends well together. The magic of mixed media, you can kind of keep going at it with different media until you're satisfied. There's always, of course, the danger of overworking your artwork, but I think I was nowhere near that since this is more of a simple piece, so yeah. Another thing about this paper, I will say, is I was a little worried because I just went with a Canson mixed media, was just how well it would hold up, because it was, you know, once you start getting past the first entire layer, you never really know. Although, I will say I didn't go hardcore with heavy watered down layers. I was still pretty impressed that it handled all of this fairly well, and so I'm excited to use more of it for sure. And well, I did for Inktober use at least one more of it, but like continuing on to try out more artworks. I even will probably attempt to do a Gojo painting actually in gouache on this paper like I originally planned. After all, because I did find that I did have the outlines on the paper done when I opened up the Canson pad of paper, and that kind of was like the first thing to fall out. Does anybody ever open up their art pads of paper or something and realize they had a half-finished or about to start artwork or something, but they had just shuffled it away and completely forgot about it? The forgotten artworks. And have you actually gone back to complete the work itself, or has it just been too long so you're just cringing at what you were planning to draw? So now time for the stars. This is done with gouache at first, and also it's using an old ruined brush for acrylic paint. I had not cleaned it properly, so it was very crunchy, but I ended up keeping it because it's very useful for this technique of stars if you don't happen to have an old toothbrush and don't feel like going out and buying a toothbrush just for that. Again, this technique would have been way better to do before I painted the trees, so it was another oopsie on that part. I knew what I was going to paint from the start, and I just screwed up the process of which layers to add when. So now you see me open the deleter white ink to use for the rest of the stars, because as the gouache was drying, a lot of the stars were fading kind of deal, which was great for like background stars, so it was useful in that sense, but I found I really wanted like very piercing white stars to be in the background just so it shows up and you can actually see them. I also had a because I did trace, I think one of my figurines has the perfect like a sized circular base. I also traced it on paper and then used that as a cover just not to screw up the moon. And although I don't know how much I used that before, because now looking at it, I think I only added it now, and I'm just dotting in a few extra stars to be, you know, extra large. Which is nice. I think I've seen people like dot in all of their stars with just like a brush, but I've never been able to do that without them looking really funky, because I think even these didn't really turn out as round as I like, and we have like a lot of them which kind of end up looking kind of like these weird blobs and not quite round enough blobs. It just, it didn't, I don't like it. It doesn't look like stars. So I usually like this sort of spray technique. And now for the silhouette of the witch, which I thought I did a much better job than last year, because last year I also had the prompt of a moon and I did a silhouette of a witch and a moon. But that one I happened to really dislike how it turned out, so this was kind of like a redemption arc, which I believe I succeeded at. I never really liked the way I had painted moons before, and it's kind of funny because if you just follow the logic of how shadows and light works, like as I did here, it's kind of why it turned out great. But I think also like the added subtlety of the colors and everything, it just worked out so nice. Working on gray paper is a very interesting experience and really cool, and I think maybe that also seriously helped the painting of this moon. And yeah, the piece is complete. I'm very happy with it. Perhaps I could have probably added like all black at the bottom there, but it was fun and I really like the way all of it came together. Mixed media is quite fun. I recommend it. If you've gotten this far, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you can drop a like on the video and subscribe if you want to tune in for more.